More than anything, I want to thank everybody for coming. And their cards, if we're going to do a bunch of Q&A at the end. I'm really hoping we can have a bit more dialogue. If you prefer, you can write out your questions. You certainly don't have to. We're also encouraging folks on Zoom to type in questions, and we'll try and merge all that together and muddle our way through making sure we get to all of that. I want to start by recognizing, just how amazing this current year is. I know there's all kinds of uncertainty. I know there are all kinds of challenges in the world. We live in a world right now that has a ground war in Europe. The Middle East is coming unwound. Climate change seems to be a pretty finicky problem and certainly having real impacts. And to not recognize those overlays on the experience we're all having and our kids are having is a little naive. And yet inside of that, I pinged a bunch of folks and asked for just what's going on this year? What's new or different, or what are some of the highlights and everything else? And I just want to start on that tone, right? Because these are really important things, right? Because fundamentally, school change comes from a place of building on strengths, right? If all we do is focus on the challenge of the moment or putting out this little fire or this big fire, whatever else, then we will lose the forest for the trees, right? And you can't help but be amazed at the breadth of choices that our seniors have for college, right? And it's not like one kid got into 20 great schools, right? It's 20 kids who are getting into 10 great schools, right? Ranging from the Ivy League to military academies and everything in between, and state schools, and just this incredible depth and plethora of options so the kids can find their right best choice, right? Which is something that, we're really excited about, with the merit scholarship to match. Right? It's amazing. And the news keeps dribbling out day after day right now. It's just incredibly exciting. And we have a student who reached out to the town of Truckee who's getting funding so that we're going to once again sponsor Culture Fest and bring the Truckee community here to tea as a sort of shared endeavor as we celebrate our collective community here in Truckee. And I'm going to whirlwind through a bunch of these things, but this year we started a Big Friends, Little Friends program trying to reach across the grades, which you'll see is one of the themes that's showing up. We have lots more middle school bonding activities, right? In part in response to some of the challenges we've faced in the middle school. This Friday, students are off competing in a Rube Goldberg competition. The lower school and faculty has been inspired to bring back Earth Day. First and fifth graders are collaborating and going to the farmers market as a field study with collaborative curriculum and experiences. On Hearth on Friday, I went and attended the third grade play written by third graders talking about Truckee history with props and, a heartfelt engagement with both challenging topics and the history of Truckee with, ethereal time travel woven in between, actual events and historic events and everything else. It was fantastic, right? All done outside in a natural theater. Right, with a bunch of little kids wrapped in attention watching that happen. Right, it's just fantastic. We have ninth grade, doing self-satire plays and presenting them to sixth grade. The psychology class is not sitting in rows studying psychology. They are out in the community, going to the senior center, engaging with, public health and mental health in our community, making real meaning out of the experience they're having in psychology class. You have eighth graders who are learning about Newton's laws by building bridges, out of natural materials out in the fields, right? Trying to make learning real and meaningful. We heard from an alum who talked about why they ended up being a biology major in college. And one of the significant things they attributed it to, one lab in ninth grade biology class, right? And that's what it means to have an impact over time. So 11th grade are writing 10,000 word novels. We have students studying Shakespeare with the local Shakespeare company, Lake Tahoe Shakes. Is that what it's called? I think I got it right. We added an econ elective. We're having more dances. We're continuing our commitment with Ski Local. We're piloting the concept of some honors classes, which I'll circle back to. Engineering, scuba, and belonging clubs. We have an incredibly positive transition happening right now in the math curriculum. We've, expanded into, it was a curriculum we had used in the past, but they have a much more evolved version of it, Eureka Plus, or what's it called?
Math squared.
Math squared. We're in the process of that rollout, but it's clearly has much more support for our teachers and is much more well aligned with our needs and how we teach math. Right? And really excited about that. These are long-term efforts that take time, to roll out, but they're really important. We've seen now multiple examples of cross-grade level engagement, whether it's, third and ninth going to Angels Islands together and some of the other examples I gave. And thematically, it's one of the things where this is an area where we have to, we're a small community school. Right? And the degree to which we weave together as a community, we are greatly empowered and we leverage those moments. And what an incredible leadership opportunity for ninth graders to teach a third grader how to put up a tent, right? That's how it's done. It's like real experience in the crucible of the real, right? Service learning coordinator who's facilitated us doing about 1,800 hours of T community members engaging with our community and doing community service. A significant expansion over what we've done in the past, and actually even more importantly, developing and solidifying those connections between outside organizations and T that can and will endure, right? Trying to do things both efficiently and effectively that will last. A great representation of something that I think everybody was hungry for, right? But just require that effort to line it up and really push it forward. There's lots more of exciting field studies to come in the next few months. It's going to be, it's springtime. Unfortunately, it seems like it's summertime, but in any case. And I will say, even since I got here in the last 6 months, we continue to do a lot more with less, right? That said, I want to recognize some of the things we're learning along the way. Right, in the end, the only path forward is for us to understand the context we're in, right, and make the challenging choices and decisions and lean into the moment together. Absolutely, retention overall is good with 1 or 2 real challenges: 8th and 5th grade. Right? They're inflection points and grade transition points. There's no surprise that's always been true. That's true in schools writ large, right? And we can say definitively, in particular with 8th grade, it's too much, right? And we have more work to be done, even though we put a lot of effort into this. I think we see, good results in a lot of those efforts. And the nature of the external challenge and people's perception around how they do and don't engage with T and what is and isn't the right path forward is going to challenge us to change in new ways, right? And there's an incredible amount of discussion happening as we wrestle with all of that. It's also a reality that we have a smaller number of students and families. It's a smaller base, right? And we have a challenging local demographic. Right, and that challenging local demographic, those two things add up to we'll probably be smaller next year, not bigger. Right, just the reality when you do the math. The degree of that is, of course, the question that's on everybody's mind. That's the thing that's right there, right? And I know there'll be lots of questions about that, and part of the big picture answer is we don't know and we won't know until we're done with re-enrollment, until we're deeper into the spring with regards to acquiring new families to come join the T family, right? And that's really hard when you're on the boundaries of things, right? I just want to own that hardship. It's a chicken and egg or a cart and a horse, whatever kind of problem, however you want to frame it, but that's front and center. It's been incredibly helpful. I think I've met with 40 plus parents now, and still gunning to see if I can make sure I meet with at least half the families one-on-one before the end of the school year. We'll see if we make it. But that's been profoundly helpful for me to understand the context of T, why it is that people are here, what drew them here, what's the seed in that core kernel, right? Especially as we lead through challenging times, because that's the one thing that we cannot mess with. Right? That's reflected in all kinds of decisions as we're wrestling, as we start now to really delve into next year's budget, whatever else. The place to start is not the field studies budget. We know that, right? The place to start is not like the faculty who are front and center with our students. Right? We understand those things. That doesn't mean that there aren't challenging choices to be made, and as we sort of wrestle with all of those variables. And it's really hard when you don't truly know what enrollment is, the distribution of that enrollment, the associated revenue with that enrollment. The other thing that's clearly surfaced is there are real concerns around rigor, right? And I certainly understand that, right? In particular, as the college process, every year we say, you know what, this is peak zaniness. It's just not possible for college and the college admissions process to be more high stakes and crazier. We've been saying that for 20 years in schools, right? So I think it'll keep getting crazier until someday it breaks, and I have no insight on when that day is. Everybody's been waiting for the music to stop for a long time. But obviously, we have a set of pedagogical values that are reflected throughout the school, right? But when you get to the end point, our students need to transition what's next. And for all of our students, that's college, right? So there is a recognition that it's like, well, it might not be appropriate to sit down a fourth grader and say, here's a 2-hour bubble dot test, and perceive that as somehow valuable pedagogically, because it's not, right? Or death by worksheets or a variety of other things. That said, we want to graduate students who are not freaked out the first time they have to sit down and take an exam freshman year in college, right? So we have to get to the end of the line and continue to refine our relevance to the world they're going into. That said, right? What we see, and if you listen to the alums, on that Zoom, right, they are finding that they're not only well prepared, but more than anything, that they're prepared in the one key skill, right, which is figure it out, which is, I don't know how to do this, but I can find the resources and ask for the help I need to do this, right? I don't know if you've heard, but it's like a changing world out there, right? I mean, there's this thing called AI. There's a few other things, right? And I mean, talking to my own kids who are, just finishing college, that arc of 4 years has been, completely transformative in terms of what they're learning, how they're doing it, how they're producing output, the way in which they will and will not contribute to society, right? Those things are transformed. It's pretty fast moving. Everybody who says they know how AI is going to play out is full of it. Right? It's complicated, right? And actually, TEA's place in the world is not to be on the bleeding edge of every new pedagogy and every new pedagogical practice. Our role in the world, right, is front and center, one kid at a time, face to face, go out in the field, do real things, find ways to connect what they're learning in the classroom with the wilds and the wilderness, the natural world, and the human and world and community. That's where our true strength lies. Right? And those students find themselves empowered, right? Because it turns out that interpersonal skills are actually pretty valuable, and it's one of the few things that AI can't do for you. AI is not going to help you your first year in college if you don't really like your roommate, right? That's going to come from the heart. That's going to come from ending up in a tent in middle school with somebody you don't really like and learning to see the goodness in others. That's where that happens. Right? And we're really good at that stuff, right? So even with recent outcomes, there's nobody on the leadership team, nobody on the board, nobody within our community who's like, this level of attrition from 8th to 9th grade is viable long-term, right? So we need to continue to lean into trying to figure that out, right? I have great faith that we can do that. Right? But we're clearly getting to the place where we've done a lot of the obvious things, and a lot of it has to do with, the collective assumptions and, about the, retaining people's buy-in with regards to why they came to TEA in the first place, and supporting their confidence that it's still the right place through secondary education when you're done with elementary and middle. I also think it's really important to recognize that when you go from 240 students to 207 students, right, that scale change, the work, like what needs to be done, does not go down, right? It goes up, right? The teacher's still preparing lessons and plans and everything else. That might be doing it, for 14 instead of 17 students. Right? We still have faculty meetings to administer and run. We have a budget to create and draft. We have events to host and throw, right? If anything, we have more of them, right? We have a pretty big list of things that we've added this year in terms of trying to find ways to engage in our local community to essentially work against changing demographics, right? We need a bigger market share. Right? There is something profoundly inefficient about 207 students scattered across 14 grade levels. Profoundly inefficient, right? There's also something that's profoundly wonderful about it, right? It's not as if T's aspiration is to have 35 kids per class and be max efficiency. Lord, no, right? Our goal is absolutely, to get to that stable sweet spot. And when you look at that Venn diagram of what a parent thinks is too small versus, and a kid thinks is too small versus too big a class, and what the teacher thinks is too small and too big a class, and what the finance office says is too big and too small a class, where there's a little tiny sweet spot in the middle that we need to keep, we need to keep finding our way to get to that place. Right? I think we recognize that in the near term, there isn't a path for a pre-K to 12 school in this area and region to have 300 kids or even 270, right? I don't deign to know whether it's 240, 230, 220, 200, where that sweet spot is. I've only been here 6 months. That's, to me, a demographics challenge, which we need to delve into, but it is complicated to actually get answers that have some integrity to that. Right? And for the moment, we have a very clear answer, which is that we need to retain the students we do have, right? We need to attract more, right? The degree of that, will, in the process of doing that, will start to clarify those questions. All right, I already got that. And I guess circling back to the beginning, I spend a lot of my week meeting with people one-on-one and in small groups and, program committee, curriculum committee, leadership team meeting, board meetings, and I hear loud and clear the anxiety and the concern, right? I also recognize, and many of you have heard me say it, that, yes, part of this is about holding hands, singing Kumbaya, and moving forward through a challenging moment, right? When the hill in front of us is big. We can either start walking or we can complain that it's going to be hard, right? It's like being, out on a camping trip in terms of when you're halfway to camp and it starts to rain. Keep going, right? And I don't want to be too trite about that, but the very reasons that I think every person is here, the kids and the kids' experience of the mission, right, is worth the push. It's pretty straightforward, right? And that doesn't mean there aren't lots of things that we have to try and do. And the tricky part is that for every 10 things we try, to address these challenges, we're pretty sure that about 7 of them won't really be effective, right? And it'll take us some real effort to figure out which 3 were, right? And then make the next list of 10. Lather, rinse, repeat. Just like it says on the shampoo bottle, that's the way through. A few more specifics and everything else. Absolutely. We're in the midst of, a school year, and we're starting to look at next year's budget with a bunch of unknowns and uncertainty and everything else. And we absolutely have to entertain, what's the structural change and the allocation between, how much administration are we going to have, how many teachers and faculty, all of that. That is certainly front and center. It's hard to answer people's specific questions sometimes because sometimes we don't know the answer. Right? Or it requires a lot of finessing as we engage with people as we shift around roles and responsibilities. What I do know, and I said in November, and I'm quite confident is that this is about supporting the people who do the thing with each of your kids. Right? There isn't a path forward for T if we have less teachers. Right? I will also say there isn't a path forward for T if we have dramatically less folks helping everybody stay organized and do stuff, right? And administrate the school, right? Not that we shouldn't tackle with that, but I see an incredible amount of flexibility in there in terms of it seems like every administrator here, is teaching a couple classes and or the equivalent and is a crew leader and or the equivalent, right? And then also trying to organize faculty meeting and professional development day. And their boss a couple weeks ago said, I need you to spend about 1/5 of your time focused exclusively on new student acquisition, right? And it's that flexible resource that I get to apply to that effort, right? Is that a messy business? You bet, right? But the commitment that I see from our students to the tea experience, from our teachers to provide that tea experience, from all of our support staff and leadership to support those folks in doing that endeavor, is strong. And there is an acute awareness that we're going to have to look at things differently and delve in, in the transition from this year to next. But it will have to be based on the actual realities. It would be premature to pull the trigger on a whole bunch of those kinds of decisions without really understanding some of these things about re-enrollment, about how successful we are in our fundraising efforts. It's profoundly important that we meet our goals in the gala. This is what help make sure that we can pay all of our teachers, right? And so there's no easy way to say that. There's no, the $750 or bust, right? Every dollar beyond that or below that is increasing in the deficit, right? So we're also, as we look at some of these, I wanted to give some specifics in terms of, I've just finished a long series of meetings as we very carefully evaluate things like, resubmitting some of our courses, which we have already done successfully, on a path to consider things like honors classes in ways that we think will directly support students with college admissions. I will readily admit that I don't think in the end T's path is to have lots of APs or to be an IB school or to say that everything is honors. I think we need to help our students and families strategically with the college admissions process, and I think Katie Watts has been fantastic at that in reading the tea leaves about how that process works and doesn't work in ways that we can make modifications to support, our families, especially in the really it's like sophomore into junior year, as they sort of gear up for that process. So that's both really exciting, and it's also a representation of how far we're willing to go to figure this out, to really help, give people the confidence that you have a strong partner educationally for the entire 14-year continuum, right? Because it's pretty different what we're doing trying to prepare kids in pre-K to go to kindergarten, right, versus what we're doing with 12th graders to try and prepare them to go out and change the world and make the world a better place, right? And both of those things are super important. We have to retain the unique qualities of T. Every school says it's a small, caring community. Every school wants to be and strives to be a place where everybody feels like they belong. Right? Every school is doing some amount of academics that align to what people think of as academics, right? But there is something magical about the community that's built around a deep commitment to field studies, right? There is something magical about a community that holds, that in authentic ways is trying to really balance academics, adventure, and character, right? And is willing to make some of the compromises to really uphold those through things, right? And make meaning out of the words that are on the wall, right? And have gratitude mean something, right? And have it be something that students can speak to over their arc of their time at T, right? And gratitude or empathy and advocacy and stewardship, collaboration, craftsmanship, all of those things, right? Responsibility, they look different over that arc. Right, and I'm really excited about the efforts to really tie that together with, more engagement with sort of what's the scope and sequence to all of that. What does it look like for a second grader to exercise and practice craftsmanship versus an 8th grader versus an 11th or 12th grader, right? Those are super important discussions, and they're the thing that will retain, right, that core, right, as we increase that clarity. So obviously the key priorities, and I'm pretty close to being done, and then we'll move on to a few other things and questions and everything else. Obviously, enrollment and the associated fiscal sustainability is one of the things that I'm particularly focused on in the near term. We're doing pretty much everything we can think of to support that in the near term and lay the foundation for a longer term, and sort of strengthen our ability to retain and recruit, if you will. And like I said, with the exception of 8th to 9th grade, the rest of it all looks either great, good, or totally manageable, right? And we see some good efficacy in our efforts to address those things. I think stuff like, celebrations of learning, high school journeys night, the 5th grade parent meeting with the 6th grade teachers, these are all like the nuts and bolts. They're not like magical solutions, but you just got to like lean in and do these things. And I think many of them have worked, and it's not enough. Got to keep going. I think everybody understands that. I want to thank everybody here and everybody on Zoom in terms of tolerating a pretty significant tuition increase. Right? The cost of attendance has gone up. Our families on financial assistance have leaned in terms of those ratios are settling back towards something that's a little more viable and sustainable for the long term. And everybody's leaned into that. I really have not heard, even from families who are leaving, that that's the reason. I, of course, know that it's not that much fun to whip out your checkbook and write the check, right? And to have that be a bigger number is not anybody's like desire. Right? But there also has been a profound understanding that it's worth it, right? That it's worth the stretch, that all this and everything that's represented, that this is what we need to do in this moment. This is a portion of our community leaning in, right? And that's been paired by an incredible commitment by our faculty, right? Essentially all of whom have indicated they're returning. I think I can characterize their broad-based sentiment in terms of deeply committed to tea and what tea does. They're here for a reason, just like you are, right? And they're annoyed that it's not all working out with regards to cost of living increases. And that's fair. I can't really look them in the eye and say anything else. That's, and this is a near-term one-off, right, in terms of, we need to bridge from where we are right now to, to more stable and sustainable enrollment and scale and all of that. And that then we can start writing that chip. But I see that commitment from our parents, from our faculty. The entire leadership team is taking a pay cut, to make sure that, right, we don't have to cut teacher salaries. Right? It was self-evident that was the right next step and what we had to do, even though it was really hard, right? Just making sure I covered everything here. I guess I just, because it's so important, I want to reemphasize how important fundraising is. Right? And this independent school model of, those who can pay due and subsidize those who can't, which we all unabashedly participate in, myself included. And not only that, but seeking tuition plus in terms of annual fund and enthusiasm, zeal at the gala. And, if you can, donate a vacation home so that Courtney can resell it for the benefit of our children. All of these things matter. Right? And there's so many people in this room who are deep volunteers on tap, the gala committee, the enrollment and, an outreach committee. There's just, all of that's represented here. And we need all of that communal effort to lean into it to make each of these areas successful. Will they all be successful? No. Right? But most can and will be, and that is the path. Right? Yeah, I think that's probably enough out of me. I wanted to make sure that I know one of the other, before we sort of go straight to Q&A, because we wanted to address a bunch of high-level topics and then see if we can answer specifics. One of the big ones is certainly the land and the campus, right? So I've outsourced a portion of this dialogue today.
Well, thanks for everybody for being here this morning. And wanted to touch on the campus for a few minutes here. And I guess before I get into my talking points, I think this is a subject that's been sort of a black box for people for a number of years. And I'll say that this is sort of the first step towards, I'll say, pulling back the curtain on that. And in the past, there's been no real intentional effort to sort of have it be a black box. It's more just really not a full understanding of what the next steps are. And so I think this is intended to be sort of that next step towards bringing people into the fold and having, an open dialogue about where we stand relative to the campus. So, and I'll happy to answer more questions when we get to the Q&A session.
Actually, do you mind to introduce yourself and maybe say a little
bit
about why you're the right person to do this?
Ooh. Hayes Parzybach. I'm on the Board of Trustees, and I've been involved with TEA since I think mid-2017, and was asked to help at that time as really more of a consultant. That was many years before my kids came to school here, and I come from a real estate development and investment background, and so this sort of falls into my day job bailiwick, if you will. And with some good elbow or some good arm twisting from some influential folks within the community, I was able to sort of get involved again a few years ago, and that's sort of parlayed into becoming a board member and really sort of leaning in heavily as it relates to both what we're doing right now relative to the campus, also the rest of the board endeavors, and trying to make sure that TEA has a good path forward relative to a home as we move forward. A little bit of background, and forgive me, I'll probably use a little bit of industry speak, but I'll try to answer any questions relative to what those might trigger here afterwards. But I'll try to be as clear as I can here. Stepping back a little bit, as you guys may or may not know, the campus that we sit on today is currently owned by the Martis Valley Education Foundation, which was formed by Julie and Eric Swan. I think it was roughly around 2015. That foundation acquired the property from the developers of Lahontan and Martis Camp, and then proceeded to go through an entitlement process with Placer County to get what they call a minor use permit for a K through 12 school. And the mission of that foundation, as originally stated, was to support the campus and facilities for the Tahoe Expedition Academy. I should also say that MVEF also, paid for the campus, did all the infrastructure improvements, built Building 1, built the learning cottages, TEA built the early childhood education. I think the numbers have been sort of thrown around, but as far as my sort of audit of all of it, I think MVEF spent roughly $24 million on the campus as a whole with all those facilities that I just mentioned. And in addition to that, has given TEA and operating funds just under $3 million. So huge investment in TEA over the years. And I would be remiss if I didn't sort of, share that reality. Let's see. We're currently living under a ground lease that I helped negotiate with MVEF on behalf. I was working on behalf of TEA, and there was a sentiment at the time that folks wanted to give money to the school and to help, as we progress with the ECE building and other campus improvements. And so there was an interest by those folks that were effectively donating and investing in the school that there was sort of a clear path forward. And at that time, MVEF agreed as part of that overall ground lease to convey, at a minimum, the 8 acres to the east of Building 1, which is where we're sitting today, and the property that exists over here. And that process was originally contemplated to be completed by approximately 2022. That didn't end up happening, but we've sort of, over the last few years, worked with MVEF to sort of say, hey, let's go ahead and move that process forward. And MVEF has been working on that for, I did the math the other day, how time flies. It's been, I think, 3 years. There was an early 2023, so I guess a little over 2.5 years, process with the county to basically create an entitlement that would allow the bifurcation of the property into the 8 acres and then the balance of the property to be able to sort of convey the 8 acres that I mentioned to TEA. As part of that ground lease that I mentioned, there's a contemplation that once that 8 acres is conveyed, there will be a 2-year time period to allow TEA to effectively consolidate onto the 8 acres. And that might beg the question, well, what happens with the rest of the campus? The field was a mutually funded facility under the ground lease, and so there's use rights to the field as contemplated under that agreement. The details around that would still be would still be sort of need to be flushed out between the parties. And that's something that has been in a discussion between T and MVEF for the last year or so. As I said, we're sort of living under that existing lease agreement, and so until that conveyance occurs, we're basically living under that ground lease agreement that was put in place in 2018. As far as when that conveyance might occur, it's really hard to know, honestly. If anybody has processed an entitlement through Placer County, it can be a windy road. But MVEF's been working on that. They're actually on their 4th submittal now. And I think, it could go as fast as, say, a year from now. It may take longer than that. Once you get the entitlement, you have to go through actually a whole nother process to actually create the separate real property. And so it is, a lot of administrative work, to get from here to there. Let's see, as far as next steps go, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's a real sort of pragmatic reality from the board's perspective that the community needs to be, aware and engaged of all of these pieces, because I think the not knowing is probably the scariest part. And so as part of a concerted effort to, start, pulling back the curtain, if you will, is we're going to be forming a campus working group that will help focus on the master planning of the 8 acres, as well as, what the sort of more near-term plan would look like to, move onto the 8 acres when the time comes. And again, also providing, just more information to the community in general around the campus and those plans. And then again, as it relates to the broader campus, I think there's, continued dialogue between MVEF and T around that part, but there's no sort of clear answer there. And while there is a more clear answer relative to the 8 acres, that becomes the sort of default focus, if you will.
So is it good for T that the conveyance takes longer to happen, because then our 2-year clock?
Repeat the question too, because
Yeah.
the people online can hear.
So the question was, is it beneficial to T that it takes, a long time to process things through Placer County? I would say that my personal perspective on that is it's a double-edged sword. Yes, on the sense that it allows for, more time on the broader campus and perhaps delays the capital investment of going on to the 8 acres. However, it also really, the not knowing is problematic for the school. The reality is that, gosh, if we had gotten the 8 acres in 2022, might we have been able to, create for more permanent buildings on that campus? Perhaps. And so I think there is both pros and cons. I would say that at this juncture, my sense is that having a path forward and being able to rally the community around a plan that gives, as Christopher has said, moving into an institution of permanence, I think is absolutely the right next step for T, and we look forward to that.
And with that, I think we should just open it up. We've been, where does somebody want to start us off? Yeah.
I know whatever answer you give us is probably subject to change
Yep.
based on enrollment.
Yep.
But I think there's lower school families kind of wondering, like, what am I signing up for?
Sure.
With the blended
Sure.
1, 2, 3, kind of what,
Sure.
again, we know it might change.
Yep. So here's what I can say, right? What? Oh, sorry, I got to repeat the question. The question was specifically with regards to basically, right now we have a merged 2, 3 in the lower school, really with the 3rd grade being the smallest grade, and what does that mean for next year, right? So we have a pretty detailed spreadsheet that includes all of the existing families, their likelihood of, based on actual past history of re-enrollment, adding new students distributed across the grade levels, based on our best estimate of what a 3-year average, like how many kids do we get in kindergarten versus second grade? We get more in kindergarten than second, so then that all trickles out to a number which has a high level of uncertainty tied to it. Right now, those numbers are right on that verge of probably will split back out, right? So if I had to just guess, right, I would say that's the trajectory we're on. We've already had those discussions in terms of really, the enrollment agreements are due right now, and the deposits become non-refundable on April 1st. So after April break, we'll start to have at least slightly better or higher quality information. We won't know entirely about new student enrollment, but that seems to be, from what I see right now, that seems like the most likely. And I think there's some interesting things to take from it in terms of the school-wide, not just in any one grade or any specifics. We didn't go into that with the intent of like, oh no, we're switching to integrated classrooms, we're going to merge all of the classrooms school-wide, or, that was not the driver behind that. It was just a pragmatic decision in the near term. We learned that it actually can be profoundly successful, right? That it has a high dependency on the specific teacher, both their willingness and ability to suddenly double the breadth of what they're teaching, and has a high dependency on our ability to provide push and support services, right? Which has been a lot of what's happened down in the lower school, right? Whether it's from learning support or, from Chloe and Kristen, there is a path to do that, right? And I don't think it's anybody's ideal. Right, I think we, baked into our 15-year history has been fundamentally like cruise and grade level, even though we're really excited about these, collaborations, but they tend to, some of them are adjacent grades, but they tend to be further apart, actually. So that said, I hope that it allows us to think different. Right? Whether it's next year or a couple years from now, I can guarantee you there may be a class of 7 or 8 kids, and we ought to think about how we do that. Right? I want to make sure that they get great socialization, right? And we're doing some things in larger group sizings, right? So I'm trying to take the goodness out of that, and we will know more when we know more. And I know that's hard, especially for the families who are directly impacted, who are right around those grade levels, because it's a pretty interwoven building. Right, in terms of all the individual and collective experiences, but it strikes me that there's a path forward. We've had actually pretty amazing success when we go out and start looking for teachers. So we don't want to dilly-dally with that, and we're going to feel pressed to make that decision, right? Relative to when we're going to have the associated information. To a degree, we're going to have to read the tea leaves.
And you again might not be able to say this.
Yep.
But given what you know, is it that would Colleen stay as the third, and would you hire a second? Like, is that the
some equivalent thereof? Yes. The most likely. Okay. Obviously, I'm new, so there's like lots of history, and we have some teachers who've moved around quite a bit, right, and actually like that. Yeah. Right, or have that flexibility, and other teachers for whom that's not their bailiwick, which is fine, right? And that, trying to weave that puzzle together and like what's the right best move, and are we hiring for this or this position, and what candidates do we get, right? And likewise, who can we support? So all of that gets baked into that cake. But yes, what you just outlined in terms of we would more or less intend to go back to what we had in the recent past, plus or minus. Yep.
Question for Hayes. Sorry, but I'm not sick. What are the terms of the lease? Like in terms of duration, is it like is it month to month? Is it year to year? And then is there a risk of us getting pushed off campus before that 8 acres is built out? Or it just seems like a long timeline there, right? To be approved by Placer, and then build it out, and then be okay, you're in, and do that move. So I'm just trying to understand the lease structure, and then, potential estimated expected build out.
Sure.
Don't repeat that question, maybe.
What?
I'll start by saying that sometimes I put my junior Esquire badge on, but I am not an attorney. I would say that it's a very good and fair question. I think it's not a super clear answer, but what I would say is there is a agreement between the parties, And within that agreement, there's a covenant to convey, which is probably, at least in California, the strongest possible commitment to effectuate the transfer that we're talking about. And we've been living under that ground lease since it executed, and then it was contemplated to wrap up in 22, but because that covenant to convey had not been effectuated, we are now living, under that ground lease. And so I think there's a very good, not only commitment on the part of MVEF, but also, the past practice since 2002 that we, maintain the ground lease as the status quo until such time as that commitment and conveyance or covenant to convey occurs. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Happy to chat more offline too,
Yeah,
if you'd
sounds
like.
good.
And I will do my best to answer those things. I also really want to remind folks how incredibly important it is that we keep leaning into wherever the friction is, right? I'm really enthusiastic about the energy of our parents, both broadly and specifically. Right? We're really concerned about this thing. We want answers. What else? If I can answer them, I will. I will make a good faith effort, and especially to be transparent about when we don't know the answer or can't know the answer in the very near term. But what's the range of possibility? And there's not much. I won't share with you, right? Maybe the exceptions being like specifically how much each person's paid in some of those things. There are some personnel things that's a little more constrained. But I think, in challenging moments, we need to be dealing real cards down onto the table, trying to figure this out. And so I really, I hope that folks will feel comfortable to make an appointment to come see me, invite me out to coffee with a couple of you, saying we need to hear more about this. We need to understand this. I am here to try and, give us confidence where we should and can have confidence, right? And to own the places where we are challenged and try and navigate a path through those challenging moments. That's, very much in my job description right now. And I'm happy to do so. Hopefully as I become more informed, I can be more helpful, and I also can make, the leadership team and everybody else here is available as we all collectively lean into that. And with that, I think we'll mill around and see if there's anything else. And just thank you all for your time and effort in coming here. Thank you for your passion for tea, and thank you for entrusting us with your kids. We know this is a real responsibility, and it's something that I think everybody takes really seriously. And I think we all know, childhood, adolescence, middle school years, these are wild times in an even crazier context in a world that we live in, right? And so the confidence that people have in that partnership between school and family is ever more important. Right? And as our duty essentially expands, we have to step in and fill that role and void, right? And finally, please, engage, join the gala committee, make sure you're bringing your friends to the gala, make sure that, if you run into somebody with school-age children at the post office or the grocery store, that you take 30 seconds and talk about why tea has been great for your family. Right? And if you have a name or somebody, you're like, we should definitely reach out to this family, invite them to campus, send it to Allie saying, just make the smallest of introductions. But that is how it's done, right? Pretty much everybody I've talked to is here because they might have been aware of tea's existence, but they're here because of some conversation they had with somebody who was connected with the school, right? That drew them in. Right? And so now we all share that burden and responsibility. And it has a lot to do with our, strength and viability moving forward, the degree to which we can all be party to that outreach. So help us find the next great tea student, participate robustly in the gala and everything else. And please, communicate frequently and often as we try and work our way through it. So thank you so much for your time today.